Welcome to Cline's Corner with me, your host, Lynn Cline. Here you'll hear from the characters of the city who give the city its character. My guest today is Santa Fe sculptor, author, and she's written a new book called The Romance Diet, Destiny Allison. Welcome, Destiny.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So you are not only an award-winning artist and author of several books, but you also own a really cool modern general store called Utopia, which is in La Tienda out in El Dorado, which you and your husband co-own, and you've created a great community center out there. So that is really cool. You have your hands in many different pots.
I hate being bored.
I know what you mean. I don't know that many of us have time to be bored anymore, so that's a good thing. Well, let's talk about The Romance Diet. This is your new book. And just to let listeners know, you will be doing a talk and a reading at Collected Works this coming Tuesday, January 26th at 6 p.m. So I hope you guys can get out and attend this wonderful event, because The Romance Diet, its subtitle is Body Image and the War We Wage on Ourselves, is a very powerful book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you must be pleased to see it making such an impact, because I know you're getting great reviews and you're doing lots of interviews and blogs and blog tours and getting the book out there, which it's an important book because it really does ask us to look at how we see ourselves, how we relate to people that we love, and the difficulties sometimes of being a woman in our modern American culture.
I was so nervous to put this book out, especially in this community where I'm fairly well known. I could envision people reading it in Pennsylvania, and that was just fine. But customers in my store were like, "Oh my God!" I was just terrified. But the response has been overwhelming, and the reviews are kind of blowing my mind at how good they are. And I mean, even yesterday, I had a woman who had just finished the book come into the store for the sole purpose of giving me a huge hug and saying thank you so much with tears in her eyes. So I'm getting really positive response, feeling like, okay, this was worth the risk of putting it out there.
Wonderful. Well, in a nutshell, why don't you tell us about the book? What is it? What's the kernel of it? What is it about, and how? So we can understand, listeners can understand how it's impacting readers.
So in a nutshell, I was a professional sculptor working in steel, and I lost my career due to a back injury. I gained a ton of weight, and when I finally decided to come back into my life and deal with it because it was affecting my marriage, I went to the doctor and got that confirmed, but also discovered that my cholesterol was completely out of control, and my husband was deeply concerned about me dropping dead on him, so he agreed to go down this road with me. He was a big guy at the time also, and so we dropped 120 pounds over the course of a year together.
Amazing.
And
each or total?
Total.
Oh,
so
okay.
He dropped 70, I dropped 50, which was significant. And it was a beautiful, romantic, wonderful journey that we took, and the losing weight was the easiest part of it. But when we started this journey, it was almost like we went down a rabbit hole into totally unfamiliar territory. And what we discovered in that process was that our marriage was not as strong as we thought it was, that there were systemic cultural norms that were eroding both of us and the way that we communicated with each other and with ourselves. And the journey almost cost us our marriage. It certainly almost cost me my sanity. And coming out of it, we discovered so many things that we really felt the world needs to hear. And so we decided that we would put the story out. I would write this in as personal a way as I possibly could, but keep it short enough that people can envision their own lives in the process, so that hopefully it creates a dialogue.
And it certainly is. Don't you think? It seems like it's created a big dialogue.
I do. Somebody was telling me the other day, "Oh, this was the topic of our dinner party last night." I'm like, "What? Tell me." And then she got busy, and I never found out what it was.
Well, it really is. I've read it, and it's not a long book, and it's very compelling. It's really a page turner in a funny way. I mean, it's not a thriller, but the things that happen to you each and together, you just want to get to the end and find out how you end up and how things turn out, because it's very honest, and as as the back of the book says, it's a very brave, raw, an unflinchingly honest book. It's a weight loss journey, a love story. It's a heart beating loudly on the page, and it really is. I mean, I love that phrase, a heart beating loud, because it's your heart, and you take a big risk by putting it out there and examining through your own lens issues that women and men have grappled with forever, and it's not just body image, but it's, it's self-doubt and fear and loneliness, maybe shutting off,
and shame and communication issues and shame. Lots of different pieces.
Yes. And I think, we were talking a little bit before the show started about feminism. And, because this book is sort of, I believe it asks readers to kind of re-examine our notion of feminism and the relationship between men and women right now. And feminism is back in the news again, of course, in this country with all sorts of, the whole lack of equality, in pay, for example, in Hollywood, that's on everyone's minds right now, and it's a big topic for discussion. And I think that when you read this book, you understand feminism. Has it really come a long way?
Well, I mean, this is one of the main reasons that I decided to put the book out. A lot of people are saying, especially the younger generations, we live in a post-feminist era. We accomplished it. We don't need this anymore. And simultaneously, you look at things like the pay gap and sexual assault on campus and what's happening in the farm workers, with and women
Bill
there.
Cosby.
And Bill Cosby. And we see it everywhere. And in many ways, we're backsliding as we're losing, Roe v. Wade kind of through legislation. And I've been really thinking a lot about it as I've been talking about the book. And what I'm seeing is that, starting in the 60s, we started legislating civil rights. And first it was for minorities. And then as the feminist movement took off, it was for women. And that was amazing. And there were huge breakthroughs and laws were passed to protect people's rights. And that's great. But the reality is you can't legislate human behavior. And so we have, I was an adult I was born when Roe v. Wade passed. I was certainly an adult when sexual harassment started being prosecuted after Clarence Thomas in 1998. Mm-hmm. Marital rape was still legal in this country when my twins were 3 years old. Rape culture wasn't coined until 2012. So when you really look at the dates of the legislation and how people have behaved for millennia, we have told people they should be equal. We've told people they need to be equal. We have told people they need to behave in appropriate manners. But we haven't shown people how to be equal. And I think that's created a radical identity crisis, not just for men and women, but for just about everybody in this country, because we're all kind of jumping off a cliff and nobody's holding hands. It's, where do we go from here? How do we be this new person that in an ideal world we want to be, but we really don't know how. And so every time a crisis happens, something unexpected, we revert back to what we know because it's comfortable and it's safe. And that's certainly what happened in my marriage as Steve and I went down this rabbit hole in the romance diet.
Right. And Steve is we were talking before the show. Also, you had a great phrase that this is a feminist book with a male hero, and I think that's a great way to describe Steve's role. I mean, he, obviously you guys had to work through things, but he was on your side, the whole way. And it wasn't ever a battle between you two. I mean, yes, you didn't agree on everything, but it's a strong testament to how we have relationships and how they survive.
And for Steve and I mean, what we found out is, we're both feminists. We always have been. And we have this really strong, wonderful relationship. We're business partners. We're best friends. We do everything together. And we really thought that our marriage was absolutely, what's the right word for it? Unbreakable. I mean, we had the ideal. And when this whole process happened, well, I lost, I used to be able to put 200 pounds over my shoulder. I was financially independent and very successful in the world. I had great accolade. I had this wonderful armor around me that meant that I didn't really have to deal with gender roles and that sort of thing. He did what he did, I did what I did, and we clash occasionally, but nothing serious. And then as I was all of a sudden no longer financially independent, I had trouble lifting a 25-pound box. I lost my sense of self-completely and reverted back to questions about self-worth. Am I still sexy? Is he going to respect me if I'm not bringing home a paycheck? Oh God, the house better be clean. All of these things that I'd been brought up to be as a woman. And as he took on more role, because now he's the provider for us and the protector and all the things that he's supposed to be, he became more intractable in his role. And so we started to clash in really major ways, especially as we opened 2 new businesses while all of this was going on.
Not an easy thing to do. It's not just one little little small. It's not one small business. This is a big complex that,
Right.
How many businesses are in there?
Oh, gosh, about 20, I think.
Right.
But I opened Utopia right at the start of this book. And then while we were going through this journey, he opened El Dorado True Value Hardware. And that was a much bigger project than we anticipated. And all of a sudden, it was like a flashlight was shown on our communication issues on these very traditional gender roles that are so common that we don't even pay attention to them until there's a moment of crisis. So, for example, I have this beautiful little boutique, and it's tasteful and it's I love my store.
I know. I have to admit, I shop there, and every time I go in there, I come home with something.
But it's beautiful, right?
And very affordable. It's a great, and the whole La Tienda is wonderful. I mean, it's done such a great service, bringing El Dorado a heart to this,
So
giving.
but it's my store, and it reflects my artistic sensibilities, etc. And so, and some of you guys who are listening today may have seen a feature in the New Mexican about Steve Ewers recently, and the computer store nestled in the back of a hardware store in El Dorado. Well, that's my Steve, and he's chaos incarnate, and he's the first to admit it. But now he's opening True Value, and he needs to meet with his business associates and his vendors and whatnot, and he's too busy to clean up his office, and that's his mind, and so where does he have his meetings? He brings them over to Utopia, and he's sitting down, and he comes in and he's got a cup of coffee in one hand and a bundle of mail in another, and the next thing I know, there's a computer leaning against my wall, and his booming voice is drowning out my customers, and I what am I going to say? I don't want to be that nagging wife. I don't want to be the woman that says, oh, you can't do this, and yet it's impacting my business. And so he had no idea. I mean, we're partners in everything. This is just as much his store as mine. So we were starting to look at the subtleties of relationship issues around this topic.
One of the things, there's a lot I really loved about this book because, as I said, it's just so honest. But what I really liked about this book was it bravely takes on issues that we don't talk about in our culture. We are everyone's working. It's a very different world now, say, than 100 years ago when women stayed at home and worked at home. Not to say that's not a job, but to be out in the world, earning a paycheck, having responsibilities, and also being a mother, being a wife, raising a family. You don't. This often is why marriages fail. There is no communication going on. Everyone's doing their own roles and performing their own duties, and meanwhile communication's breaking down, or you're not getting the support that you need from each other to have a fulfilling life, and so it can be really hard. And I often wonder about competition between wives and husbands about money.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Steve is the most supportive man I've ever met in my life. When I decided to stay home and write instead of helping him at the center, after my back went out, he didn't blink an eye. It was absolutely whatever you want to do. He supported me in everything I've ever done, and really is just a very rare man in many ways. But I find that that for women, when we're being taught simultaneously, break the glass ceilings, get out there, don't let anything stop you, because if you don't, you're less than a woman. But simultaneously, oh yeah, there's the kids and somebody needs to go to a doctor's appointment. Our kids are grown, but I certainly experienced this in my first marriage. Or, a mother-in-law has dementia, and all of a sudden, who's taking care of that mother-in-law? Where are the priorities? We keep trying to do everything. And I think that's going back to what I talked about before, is that our behaviors haven't changed, even though the expectations have. And I think that women feel a lot of shame around those issues, and they don't want to speak up. They don't want to be perceived as the B word, and they don't want to be the nagging wife and all of the stereotypes about what a bad woman is. They want to be nurturing, and they want to be loving, and they want to be successful in their careers. And the reality is it's impossible to do all of it all the time. And so what gets let go? My house gets cleaned once every 3 weeks or so when I just can't stand it anymore, because there's just not enough time, and I had to choose my priorities. But for a while there, I was trying to be the perfect wife because I didn't see how I could be valued otherwise, because my identity was so tied to what society tells me I should be. So if I'm not successful, and I'm not raising children, and my house isn't clean, and I'm overweight, and I'm getting down on the dance floor, I'm breaking everything that I'm supposed to be doing to be a good woman. And so I ended up policing myself much more than anybody in society ever needed to do. And I think that women do that to themselves all the time. I also think that men do that to themselves, and they're as boxed in as we are. And so, yeah.
I think you're right, because I think women can tend to be able to talk about those issues more with their friends or their family, not their husbands, or maybe even with their husbands. But I think it's harder for men to open up and talk honestly about those kinds of feelings.
Definitely, and it was really interesting as we went through this journey, and we're battling, and we're trying to get through it, and we're trying to stabilize our marriage, and it was very heartfelt for both of us, but it was personal, right? It was about him and I, and then as we got out of it, and I started writing the book, and he'd come home and read chapters and give me comment and feedback, and as the book was done, something really profound happened, and what was in his mind all of a sudden went into his heart in some ways, and he came to me right before I sent out the galleys for review copy, and said, we need to talk. And my first response is, what's the problem? And his response was, no, nothing bad. I've just been really thinking. And what I realized is I love you more than my ego. And that's huge for a guy to say. And so I gave it a day or two, and I went back to him and I said, all right, explain that. And he said, well, the reality is I was taught to be a man. I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to be the provider. I'm supposed to be the protector. I'm supposed to make things okay for you. And the reality is if you're going to be as equal in this relationship, and I'm going to support you as much as you supported me, then I have to shed that identity. I have to figure out who I really am instead of who society has told me I have to be. And I have to create a new identity that makes room for you. And that's what I'm going to work on. Okay, this is profound stuff.
Yes, it is indeed. And that's kind of the heart of the book, too,
very
about
much so.
Both of you finding a way to be yourself. And that's one of the issues in this book is, being able to be yourself and not be ashamed of things like weight. And body image is a big topic in this book. It's a big theme. It made me wonder as I read this book about body image in America today, because body image in America today is very different. I mean, in reality, bodies are different than they were even 20 years ago. We have, an obesity epidemic. And so it's got to be shifting. I just, how do we walk around without shame of what we look like? I mean, assuming that we're taking care of ourselves the best we can. And, how do we have a positive body image?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, for me, as I came through this process, the first thing I made a promise to myself to do was to no longer compare myself to other women. It doesn't matter. We all have bodies, we all have scars, we all have warts and everything else. And the reality is what we look at in this culture is sexy versus beauty. And, women have been taught to be sexy their entire lives until the point that they need to be matrons, and then they get to become invisible. Mm-hmm. And our sexuality is what defines us as having value or worth in the world. So we buy into the advertising because landing a man and keeping him is really what we're supposed to be doing. And that's millennia old. Today, I think that that's really different. And because, for a long time in human history, we wouldn't have survived as a race without this. But now we don't need it anymore. It's irrelevant. And so I'm not comparing, and I'm finding something in every woman that I find beautiful, and I refuse to allow myself to look in the mirror and say something negative about myself. And then the other really important one is I know my husband loves me and loves me deeply, and for years he has said, "Oh, you're beautiful," and I would say, "Oh, no, I'm not, my hair's a mess," or, "Oh, you're gorgeous tonight. Oh, I don't know, I think this dress makes me look fat," and put myself down right in front of him. Well, that did two things. One, it secured my negative sense of self, but it also called him a liar. And if he was willing to lie to me about how I looked, because I couldn't believe it myself, what else was he willing to lie to me about? Right. And it created this whole element of mistrust that was hovering beneath the surface of this marriage.
Now, that's fascinating how you've just taken control of what so many women and some men, intuitively do, which is self-criticizing, And I remember reading a few years back about how when anybody ever gives you a compliment, instead of saying, "Oh, this old thing," or "Oh, what are you blind?" Just say thank you and accept it and believe it. But
going back to what you were saying about obesity and things changing, I'm watching shifts in the media, which is fascinating to me. And now all of a sudden you've got the big and beautiful campaigns, which are getting lots of yes. social media traction, and people are going, "Oh, wow, that's wonderful." And the reality is it doesn't really matter what your shape is or what your size is as long as you're healthy. And when you're healthy, health is a reflection of self-love. Yes. It means you're taking care of yourself and you're paying attention to what goes into your body and how much exercise you get. And so there are lots of big people who don't fit normal stereotypical ideas of beautiful or sexy, who are absolutely healthy and gorgeous in that. And then there are those who are going to succumb to the media again, telling us that, "Oh yeah, big is great. Eat have another supersized Coke. It doesn't matter. matter. You're big, you're beautiful, let it go. And I don't support that. I support a pursuit of health, and health is a reflection of self-love, and that we care enough about ourselves to take care of ourselves.
I think that's just so important. It's so important. Now, did you have the same attitude about how you see yourself before you wrote The Romance Diet, or did that come as a result of writing The Romance Diet?
It came as a result of living through the experience, getting some help for some of my issues, and then coming out of that with a renewed pledge to be better to myself. But no, I've had body image issues since as long as I can remember. I think most women have. I
don't know a single one who hasn't.
Yeah.
If they're being honest.
Yeah, and it's time for that to change.
It is time for that to change. So, and this book can help to do that. I really believe it. It's just a very powerful, beautiful, very honest. It's like you're sitting at the table with readers, just telling them what happened. It's just so natural. It's just wonderful. So I know you're going to do very well with this, and. Let's see, if people would like to learn more about The Romance Diet, as well as some of your earlier books, you wrote a memoir, Shaping Destiny, which this is not really a follow-up, but could you say it's a companion piece?
It is. This is the first part of my life where the first transformational journey, and then we had a gap, and now this one.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it must be so cathartic to write these kinds of books.
And scary, but it is cathartic.
Yeah. So you can learn more about Destiny Allison's books on her website. That is destinyallisonbooks.com, and it's Destiny, DESTINYALLISON books.com.
Right.